Cloning was a fairly common practice in the Star Wars galaxy, one that had a wide variety of potential uses. For example, we all know how the practice was used to create the Grand Army of the Republic, the Kaminoan-bred force of clone troopers that gave the Clone Wars their name. But the Kaminoans weren't the only cloners in the galaxy. They were widely considered masters of the art, sure, but other species industrialized cloning before they did, and in the years before the Clone Wars, other cloners were far more well known. In this video, we'll be taking a look at a variety of cloning methods and stacking up the results against the Kaminoans.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
First, let's recap how the Kaminoans did things. The Kaminoans as a species had a vested interest in cloning and genetic engineering in general, as they used it to ensure their survival when Kamino was flooded at the end of an ancient ice age. They perfected their methods essentially by, in their eyes, perfecting themselves. They radically altered their own genetic code and rebuilt their society around cloning, which they used in some fashion to ensure the continuation of their species and of species on which they were dependent for food and such. This made their approach to cloning much more involved and cautious than other methods, typically resulting in superior products. They almost always tweaked the genetic code of their products, removing imperfections like allergies and altering brain patterns to eliminate neurodivergence and ensure compliance. Like most cloners, they accelerated the aging of their products, but not to an extreme degree, preferring to take the time to allow clones to grow properly, training them for whatever tasks they were ordered as they grew. This extended growth time allowed for clones to be taught better, making them mentally on par with your average sentient being. Now, we all know the Kaminoans were sadistic perfectionists with no regard for clone lives and a fondness for eugenics, problematic attitude that we by no means intend to support or put in a good light. But in the wider scale of the cloning industry, the Kaminoans were actually on the more humane side. Even with their eugenics and detachment, they still paid close attention to their clones and ensured at least some degree of normalcy as they raised them. Most cloners were far more neglectful. A lot of galactic societies made use of cloning technologies, often for the same reasons the Kaminoans originally turned to it. The Comites used it to phase out biological reproduction entirely, hoping to rid their species of unpredictables. Polis Massa, together with pretty much every advanced world in the galaxy, used it for medical purposes, cloning up donors for patients in dire need of transplants. The Verpine of Roach used cloning to beef up the numbers of their worker caste, but there were also some who, like the Kaminoans, got into cloning with the intention of profiting off growing independent beings instead. The Arcanian clone masters were the galaxy's most infamous cloners, and their methods of cloning generally became the standard method used in the Republic before the Kaminoans arrived on the scene. The Arcanian technique was much quicker and far more industrial than Kaminoan methods, resulting in cheaper clones you didn't have to wait a full decade for. These clones were markedly inferior, however, which is why Kamino got the contract for the Grand Army of the Republic instead of Arcania. Well, at least originally. More on that later. Now, we should establish that when we're talking about different cloning methods here, what we're really talking about is clone programming methods. Cloning itself was fairly straightforward and done without all that much variation. Cloners would take a cell from the template, extract their genetic code, implant that code into a donor cell, and then gestate these cells into nutrient jars. The nutrient mixes used in the gestation process varied from cloner to cloner, and were capable of influencing some physical traits and, more importantly, maturity rates. Generally speaking though, everyone grew the bodies the same way, if at different paces. The differences came in how they got those bodies to function. Generally speaking, most people who ordered clones wanted adults, and most of them also didn't want to have to wait 20 years or so to get them. By using aggressive nutrient mixes, the Arcanians worked out how to speed up the aging process and ultimately managed to work out how to get human clones to maturity in as little time as a year. But this came with two major problems. It made it incredibly difficult to properly train the clones, and it also tended to lead to mental instability. The Kaminoan method was unique mostly in that they actually took the time to properly train their clones. This allowed their products to be perfectly functional beings, but it was very time consuming, and this intensive training process was most of the reason why the Grand Army of the Republic took 10 years to grow. The standard Arcanian method, on the other hand, was much faster, if a lot less reliable. Instead of naturally training their clones, Arcanian clone masters used a process called flash training. Flash training used holograms to implant instructional images in the brains of clones while they developed, giving them a basic understanding of whatever the clone masters wanted them to understand. A bit of this was actually used on Kamino too, with young clones receiving part of their early instruction through an in-depth variant of flash training, which we can catch a glimpse of in Attack of the Clones. But while the Kaminoans only used flash training as part of a wider regimen, the Arcanians and their other contemporaries tended to rely entirely on it, using flash training to program everything from language and communication skills to combat techniques into their clones. Flash training wasn't perfect, however. It was difficult to flash train clones for complex tasks, and it only programmed the clones with knowledge of whatever they were being trained for, not contextual understanding of it. For menial jobs, it tended not to matter, but even at that level, flash-trained clones tended to display a relative lack of skill. Clone troopers that were completely flash-trained were considerably less accurate and had a very poor sense of strategy in comparison to their Kaminoan counterparts, for example, which made them far less effective. To remedy these issues, the Arcanians developed a variant method called memory imprinting. Memory imprinting was based around the assumption that clones in their original templates would have compatible brain patterns, allowing the clones to potentially become perfect copies of their template. Clone masters started taking detailed brain scans of their templates and then downloading the brain patterns they received onto clones, which allowed them to bring their products up to speed in a matter of weeks. This, in theory, would solve the biggest problem of flash training, as the clones would have the same understanding of techniques as their templates did, as they would have the same memories. But memory imprinting came with an even worse problem than flash training. As Yoda noted in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, clones were still distinct individuals in the Force, unique on some level despite their shared genetics. As a result of this, the Arcanians found that memory imprinting was ever so slightly imperfect. There was just some small difference between the clones and their templates they couldn't artificially weed out. As a result, when clones were trained through memory imprinting, they tended to develop an affliction known as clone madness. The causes of clone madness were speculated as being anything from the result of clones taking in too much information at once to a sort of double presence in the Force, but the effects, at least, were well known. Clones who received memory imprinting tended to experience severe identity crises, which quickly turned into psychosis. Psychotic clones often became violently insane as their mental state deteriorated even further, usually killing themselves or otherwise getting themselves killed in short order. For fear of clone madness, the Arcanians refused to grow clones for less than a year, and 3 to 5 years of growth were generally considered optimal. Some improvements were made to the Arcanian process. Specialized Spartai cloning cylinders, for example, allowed clones to be grown to maturity in just a year with a greatly minimized risk of clone madness. During the Clone Wars, the Republic actually took advantage of this, contracting Arcanian microtechnologies to use the Spartai cylinders to make a reserve clone army on Centax II, a moon of Coruscant, so as to supplement the Kaminoan clones. During the Clone Wars, the Galactic Senate passed Decree E49D139.41, which severely limited cloning across the Republic with the intentions of mostly reserving it for military use. In full, the decree read, "All non-military cloning of sentience is prohibited, and military cloning is to be confined to Republic-licensed facilities such as those of the government of Kamino and any others designated by the Republic now or at any time during the duration of hostilities." This prohibition encompasses the supply of cloning equipment, the hiring or contracting of cloning technologists and genetic engineers for the purposes of carrying out cloning techniques, and the procurement of sentient cloned organisms. Exemptions: Com, Lur, Columbus, and Arcania may continue therapeutic medical cloning with appropriate license on a case-by-case basis. Even after the hostilities mentioned in the decree ended, the Galactic Empire continued to enforce the decree, nationalizing all cloning facilities and, in the process, suppressing further advancements in cloning. After the Empire's fall, however, there was one notable advancement in the cloning field. Grand Admiral Thrawn managed to find a solution to the problem of clone madness. Using salamiri, reptiles capable of naturally repelling the Force as a defense mechanism, he figured out he could essentially shield developing clones from the Force during the gestation process. This, combined with Spartai cylinders and memory implanting, allowed him to grow fully mature clone stormtroopers in 15 to 20 days without any instability problems at all. So that's our look into the side of the cloning industry that you might not have been familiar with. But what do you think? Would you like to learn more about the infamous Grand Admiral Thrawn and his campaign against the New Republic? Free to post your thoughts in the comment section below. And just before you go guys, if you want access to exclusive content and a behind the scenes Discord, consider donating to our Patreon. If you like the music we used in this video and plenty of our other recent ones as well, check out our Relax Jack music channel where we post weekly uploads, some of which you can use for your own creative projects. And if you just want to join our wider community, check us out on our main Geetsly's Discord and our Geetsly's gaming network as well guys. Anyways, as always, thank you so much for watching and I hope you learned something new.